the Secretary and Minister Gallant have been speaking quite frequently. And during those communications pre and post, I believe one of the readouts from the Israeli side, I think it was on Monday night, said that the opportunities for a diplomatic solution in Lebanon were decreasing. Is that something that, an assessment that is also shared here by the Pentagon in the wake of that conversation?
Well, in terms of the ceasefire deal, I would refer you to the State Department, who's really the lead on that. But I can tell you that we do not believe that the deal is falling apart. We believe that that is the best way to end the war that's happening in Gaza and to lower those tensions in the region. And that's why you keep seeing administration officials from all across this administration go back into the region and continue to engage, different countries, different partners there to try and bring a deal closer together. Because ultimately what we're talking about is bringing hostages home and an end to what has been, I think it was referenced earlier, an almost year-long conflict. And that's what I think everyone wants to see, is this come to a close and see a new path forward for the Palestinians in Gaza and see our hostages come home. So no, is the deal done? I don't think so. We're still working towards that every single day, but we need the commitment from all of those involved to make sure that it can be put into place. Joseph.
Thank you, Sabrina. So back to the 4 or 5 phone calls between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant. Is it fair to say, because if we read the press releases here at the Pentagon and we see the Israeli reports, it looks like Secretary Austin is not on the same page with Minister Gallant when it comes to reducing tensions, avoiding any incursion in Lebanon. Is it fair to say that there are some differences between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant?
Well, I won't speak for Minister Gallant. I can only speak for Secretary Austin. I think there is a shared agreement that no one wants to see this broaden out to a wider regional conflict. There's also an agreement that we want to see a ceasefire deal put into place. The parameters of that deal and how it gets implemented, those are still being negotiated. And again, I would refer you to the State Department, who's really lead on, and the NSC, who's really lead on some of those negotiations. But I certainly think there's agreement between both countries that we do not want to see a wider regional conflict.
So what you're saying now, this is your vision towards the conflict in the region. Do you believe that the Israelis are listening to these points that you mentioned?
I think they're certainly listening. You wouldn't see this amount of communication between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant.
Are they accepting?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. I'm not going to go beyond the readouts. What I can tell you is that every time that the Secretary engages Minister Gallant or anyone else in the region, these are, direct conversations that are being had about not wanting to see this widen out to a broader regional war. And they have conversations about other things too, whether it's, operations being conducted within Gaza, whether it's on, tensions growing on that northern border. There are conversations, I would push back on the premise that they're not listening when there's so many conversations between the two of them so frequently that, of course, there's engagement. We can agree to disagree at times, but I'm just not going to be able to provide more than the readouts from before. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question on the PDA for Ukraine. So it looks like Congress is struggling with passing the CR now. So why not to choose what seems to be a more straightforward path and just formally notify Congress about the intention to use the remaining authority to secure this amount as it has been done before?
Well, we do plan to use the authority that we have allocated for, we do plan to use the amount that's allocated for authority. It's being able to extend that authority to use it beyond the fiscal year that we are working with Congress on. So there is every intention that we want to use every dollar and cent of that authority, but the issue is also we can't draw down packages without that those capabilities on our shelves. So that's something that we're also working with. And I'd remind you too that during the 6 month that we didn't have that supplemental package, we weren't able to restock our shelves. So that's why we need Congress to offer this extension to allow us to continue to dole out those PDA packages.
But my understanding is that it can be extended without Congress passing another legislation if the State Department just notifies the Congress that there's an intention to use that. So why not to choose that path?
Right now, we're working with Congress to extend this authority. Look, there is bipartisan agreement in Congress that we are going to continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And you're seeing that on both sides of the aisle. So I think that there is agreement on we're going to continue to support Ukraine. We're working with Congress right now. When I have more to share, I will.
One more. Do you have maybe a number for how much money remains from those recalculated accounting errors for aid for Ukraine? Do you have anything of that?
I can tell you that we have $5.9 billion left in Ukraine PDAs, all but $100 million of which expire at the end of the fiscal year. So it's a total of 5.8. I don't have the recalculated cost from some of those other packages, but that's the total that we have right now. Tony, I know you're going to ask a
Try
PDA
this
question.
another way.
Sure.
You've had since April to spend down this money. You guys moved with alacrity on a lot of stuff. You had a $1 billion PDA, and then the rest have been in the $250 million range. Why have you not obligated all this, used this authority to this point? This doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, Tony, the reason why we haven't been able to send out what you're saying is larger packages is because we have to have those systems, those capabilities, those munitions on our shelves. If we don't have something on our shelves, we can't just send it out. And so that's part of the reason why, you've seen a range in size of these packages, but they are metered and they are also done that way because that's how the Ukrainians also receive some of these capabilities, and it helps them also be able to process it, get it to their front lines or wherever they need it to go. This is a system that was put in place, early on. If you just sort of dump a bunch of things on the battlefield and capabilities, that also doesn't help. We are taking a metered approach that we've worked out with the Ukrainians on
You're
this.
saying there's stockpile, there's inventory shortfalls in what, rockets and missiles and protective gear? I mean, can you flesh it out a little bit? This seems kind of surprising.
We're always assessing our readiness. So against any package that's drawn down, it's always assessed against our readiness. So if, the services, the chairman, the secretary do not feel that, a certain package can, have certain things or amounts in it, then we won't draw that down until we can backfill our shelves.
What happens to the $5.8 billion in authority if there's no extension? And this is like free money to you guys. What happens to the? It's not money that goes back to the Treasury. It's just authority that goes poof, and you don't have.
The funding remains. It's the authority that needs to be extended. So we're working with Congress again. We're continuing to engage. When I have more to share, we will. But this is something that, as I mentioned earlier, has bipartisan support to make sure that Ukraine is continuing to get what it needs on the battlefield. So we're going to continue to work with Congress on this issue. Okay. Yeah, Phil.
Two questions back on Israel. One is, the administration's been quite clear that it's going to do what it needs to do to help Israel defend itself. Does that apply to an Israeli offensive into Lebanese territory? That's the first question. The second question relates to, Israeli intentions. You said that that the United States and Israel share the desire to not have this escalate into a regional war. Would an escalation in Lebanon be that regional war that you're trying to avoid? And if so, help me understand how there is agreement there between the United States and Israel.
So on your first question, Phil, I think we've been pretty clear from the beginning that we are there in the defense of Israel should we need to come to their defense. We're not going in and supporting offensive ground operations in what they do, whether it be in the north or in Gaza. And the president has been very clear that you're not going to have U.S. boots on the ground in Gaza. As you might remember, when we set up a maritime corridor that brought, close to 30 million pounds of aid through, we did not have U.S. boots on the ground to do that. So the president was very clear at the very beginning on what the United States' role is when it comes to Israel's operations. On your second question, look, without going down the rabbit hole of hypotheticals, and not wanting to define what a broad war would look like, we don't want to see a regional conflict spread. Right now, we believe the conflict still has remained contained into Gaza. Ultimately, the best way for things to resolve and for tensions to lessen is by diplomatic means. And that's why you're seeing such an aggressive push from, many different officials across the administration that continue to travel back to the region or elsewhere to engage officials on both sides to make sure that we can reach that type of ceasefire. Yeah.
Thanks, Sabrina. Some 50,000 relatives of ISIS fighters are currently detained in the northeast of Syria prisons such as Al-Hol and Roj. You might know that multiple times some detainees tried to escape from the prisons. Do you have a long-term plan for the prisons and detainees in Syria?
Well, it's something that we work with, through U.S. Central Command. So for more details on, how they're addressing the threat of ISIS, I'd direct you to them. But, we've been very clear, and I just read out, even at the top on the partnered raid that we did, ISIS still does present a threat in the region. It's very different from what it was in 2014. But to now, it's still something that we continue to monitor, and that's why you see us partner with, whether it be the Iraqi security forces or the SDF, conducting these raids against, ISIS cells or leaders.
And, the campus or the prisons are guarded by the SDF. So how long will your partnership with the SDF and other partners in the region continue?
Yeah, I don't have a timeline. Yeah.
Thank you, Sabrina. I have a question about the recent resolution approved today in the European Union about the use of European weapons in the Russian territories. So some European states, such as Italy and a few more, did not sign it. So I have two questions. My first question is, does this lack of unity in Europe right now in the use of weapons in the Russian territories may compromise the decision of the U.S., such as the Pentagon, maybe to use different kind of weapons in Russia, such as the long-range missiles? That's the first question.
Sure. So on the use of long-range weapons into Russian territory, our position and our policy hasn't changed. I'd push back on the fact, though, that it might be this issue that you're referring to, but there is broad unity and cohesion with European countries, the United States, and other partners and allies around the world when it comes to making sure Ukraine has what it needs on the battlefield to take back its sovereign territory. And that is evidenced by the UDCG, which has over, I think, 50 partners or organizations part of it.
Weapons into the. I know there is unity. I'm talking about.
Yeah, I can't speak for other European countries. I can only speak for our policy, and our policy hasn't changed.
And the other question is, does those decisions, the negative of some country not to use some weapons, and instead of some other European country that want to use your NATO weapons into the Russian territories, will change any plan from the Pentagon? Any strategies that now there is this bigger support from Europe?
I appreciate the question. I can't speak for other countries and their plans if they, change their policies. I can only speak for us and our policies. And our policy right now, that has not changed. And I'll remind you that I think a few weeks ago we mentioned that Russia has moved its airfields back significantly out of what you're referring to as the ATACMS. They've moved it out of ATACMS range. So ATACMS wouldn't even be able to be employed in a useful way on the battlefield because those airfields aren't in those ATACMS range. So again, I can't speak for European countries and change their policies. I can only speak to ours. And right now, there's no change in U.S. policy. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Follow up.
Okay.
Very quick. So it would be best for all European countries to approve the use of weapons in order to move Russia's back and have and free Ukraine faster from Russia. That would be the best hope.
I think we're getting into a bit of a hypothetical, and I do want to point out, and what the Secretary has said, as someone that has significant experience on the battlefield and understands how these things knit together, the Secretary, whenever he talks about this, we've have been very clear. It's not a silver bullet. It's not one capability that's going to win the war or suddenly, unlock something for the Ukrainians. It's how all the weapons, all the systems knit together and how the Ukrainians employ those together on the battlefield. That is how they are going to be successful. So again, it's not one system that all of a sudden X happens and it's a deluge and they've been able to take back all their sovereign territory. It's not a silver bullet. It's how they all work together. And you're talking about U.S. systems, NATO systems, different European systems, and old Soviet systems all working together. And that is a challenge. And that is why, the Ukrainians continue to they're employing all these different types of capabilities on the battlefield and still being very successful at doing that. But it is not one system or capability that's going to be that silver bullet. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. I wanted to ask about AUKUS Pillar 2 and kind of the efforts to reduce export control restrictions. There was a release this week, and I kind of understand that there were amendments to arms traffic regulations and licensing exemptions. Does the Secretary feel there are further changes necessary to support Pillar 2 and our AUKUS partners as far as trade? And I guess, could you kind of categorize the significance of these export control changes? Is this rudimentary, or I guess, what's your feeling on that?
I'm going to take that question for you. I just don't have more details to offer on that one.
My own understanding, I guess, I'd love to know what's the Secretary's process of how he helps support these changes. Is it through state or commerce or, but
for AUKUS?
Yeah.
It's of course an interagency process, and we have different levers here throughout the department, whether it's in our policy channels or and through the services that all engage on issues and advise the Secretary. But look, I will take your first one on that, so we'll certainly get back to you on that. Yes.
Thank you, Sabrina. Regarding what's happened the last 2 days in Lebanon,
Mm-hmm.
so how much damage did you think, with your assessment, of course, that Hezbollah has been done because of this explosive? And do you think these steps or these explosives will deter Hezbollah from attacking Israel again? And my last question will be, do you still confident that the diplomacy is still possible to solve this high tension of the border there?
Yes, absolutely. Diplomacy is the best way to resolving the tensions that we're seeing in the Middle East. That's absolutely not a corridor that's closed off. That's certainly a path that you've seen so many folks from this administration engage on and continuing to urge forward for diplomacy, because that is ultimately the best way to reach a ceasefire deal in Gaza. In terms of an assessment on the attack, I just don't have that for you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. A quick question on the new leader of Al-Qaeda. Some reports indicated that Saif al-Adl apparently moved from Iran to into Afghanistan recently. So he, as you know, he is the new leader of Al-Qaeda. And also there are reports that a bunch of other people who are with Al-Qaeda or affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS moved into Afghanistan, and they are close with some faction of Taliban like Haqqanis. First of all, do you confirm that the Saif al-Adl's movement or not? And second, are you concerned, or what is the assessment of the Pentagon regarding these reports and concerns that put it out?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm just not going to be able to do an intel assessment from here, but I'm just not going to be able to go into those details. Yeah.
Thanks, Sabrina. So you probably saw this. There was a massive explosion pretty deep in Russia in the Turopets region, where Ukraine claimed that they sent a drone and blew up a weapons arsenal. So that was one of the deeper strikes of the war, and the explosion was, one of the biggest one that's gone on in Russia. So you alluded earlier that your policy hasn't changed with deep strikes in Russia. So do you view that as disobeying that request of the Ukrainians?
I think you just said that they used drones, right?
That's what they said, yes.
Our policy hasn't changed. To my knowledge, that an attack wouldn't even reach what you're referring to. Again, they've moved many of their airfields out of ATACM's range, but our policy hasn't changed.
We haven't provided them any drones.
I mean, we've provided them drones, of course, in different packages, but for this particular strike, I'd refer to the Ukrainians to really speak to it.
But why are you so certain that it was not a U.S. drone?
I would refer to the Ukrainians to speak to that. Our policy, what we are being asked about earlier, is on ATACMS and those long-range deep strike capabilities when it comes to that specific capability. I just don't have more to provide on this. I'd refer you to the Ukrainians to speak to that.
They're using drones to
Thanks,
strike
everyone.
deeply.
Go on.